Hi guys, it's Angie with Fun Endeavors Tie-Dye Lab. Today let's make an ice-dyed geode shirt. I have the shirt turned inside out and I have it laying flat on my table. I'm going to use a washable marker and kind of draw a little area where I'd like for the center of the geode to be. This won't necessarily be the shape of the center of the geode, but it will allow me to keep finding the center area on the shirt as I'm tying it. I'm going to grab the center of that area that I drew, lift the shirt up off the table, kind of give it a shake, and I'm only grabbing one layer of fabric when I grab that center portion. So it's going to allow the second layer of fabric to fall down below. I'm going to slide my hand all the way down to the end of that fabric, and that's where I'm going to begin tying my geode lines, or the rings of the geode. To tie the lines, I'm using artificial sinew, which is wax coated. So what I'm going to do is do a couple wraps around an area with the sinew going right on top of itself. Then I'm going to begin to pull the sinew, and as I continue to tighten it or pull it, it will tighten down on itself. You'll actually feel it will kind of lock, and it'll be difficult to continue pulling it. I pull until I can't pull anymore. Then sometimes I'll go ahead and give a couple more wraps around that same area and do it again. Otherwise, I just move on and tie another sinew line. And for this particular shirt, I'm not going to tie the sinew lines an equal distance from each other. I'm going to vary the distance between the lines and just kind of try to make it as random as I can. And as I'm tying the lines, I'm trying to keep the fabric pretty messy. I'm roughing the fabric up a little bit, trying to fold it in on itself, because truthfully, the messier you keep the fabric, it forms all of these really cool like little areas on the lines and in the shirt, and it makes the shirt look a lot more like a geode in my opinion. You really don't want your geodes to look like bullseyes. So when you're tying your lines, like if you start in the middle and you go outward, sometimes it's really easy to make all your lines perfect and make everything look like a bullseye. A bullseye is a great design, but not when you want it to look like a geode. So in my opinion, the messier and the more random you are with your geodes when you're tying them, I think the more natural they look. Okay, so when I get down to the very end, or what is going to be the center of the geode, I'm going to sort of divide this one into two areas. I'm not going to make two large areas, but I'm going to make one center and another smaller area off of the center. So to do that, I'm going to take the sinew down in between the fabric, kind of dividing the fabric into two spaces. Then I'm going to tie each one of those areas individually. So I'm going to tie lines going out to the very end of one of those areas. Then I'm going to wind my sinew back down those lines. Then I'm going to tie the second little area before I go ahead and cut my sinew off. Then I'm going to go ahead and straighten out my geode. I'm going to make sure it's laying pretty flat and that it's pretty straight, because I'm going to place this shirt aside and I'm going to allow it to dry out completely. I get better color saturation in the middle of thick folds like this if I apply the dye when the shirt is completely dry. If you'd like a little more information about this, I have a blog post out on my website that discusses this topic in more detail, and I have a link to my website down below this video in the description. To dye the shirt, I've placed it on top of a metal rack, and I have the metal rack down inside of a plastic tote. And now I need to make myself an ice barrier, and to do that, I'm going to use some silicone cake molds. I'm going to attach the silicone cake molds together, then I'm going to wrap them around the shirt, and I'm going to attach some wooden clothespins to my metal rack to hold the silicone cake molds up close to the shirt. I have links down below this video in the description for most of the items that I'm using. So I told you that I wanted this shirt to dry completely before I applied the dye. This shirt is extremely dry. I tied this shirt about 3 months ago, and I'm just now getting around to dyeing it. So if you're wondering, if you've tied up a shirt, whether or not it's still safe to dye, as long as you haven't moved it around a lot to kind of dust out that dried soda ash that's in the shirt, you should be perfectly fine. Because the shirt is completely dry, before I begin applying the dye to the top of the shirt, I am going to lightly spray it with a soda ash solution that I've placed inside of a spray bottle. This will help the dye to stick to the top of the fabric a little bit better. For this geode, I'm going to use various shades of red and some black and gray colors. I'm kind of mixing it up and not doing just a single color like just red. I think it gives a little bit more depth and dimension when you add something in. So that's the reason for the black and the gray colors. You can just do like a single color geode, or you can just do all reds if you want to. I just like the dimension that happens when you add in another color. I'm going to kind of vary the way I'm applying the dye to this geode as well. Part of the colors I'm going to apply directly to the sections that were formed with the sinew lines. Sometimes I'm going to apply the dye directly to the sinew lines. Sometimes I'm going to split the sections and apply more than one color of dye to each section. So I'm trying to kind of randomize the way I'm applying the dye. And most of the dye colors I'm going to apply to several different areas on the shirt. I know I've pulled a lot of dye colors, but you don't have to use this many dye colors. I just happen to have this many dye colors, so I decided to use them. If you only have 2 or 3 reds, then just use 2 or 3. Just apply them more times on the shirt. Same thing with your blacks and grays. If you'll notice, I only pulled like 4 different gray and black colors because I want that to be an accent color, but I really want the red to be the standout on this shirt. Okay, so let me tell you the colors that I've pulled that I'm going to use on this shirt. I'm going to use black cherry, fire red, red wine, and cardinal red, which are all Dharma Trading Company colors. I'm also using wild cherry and berry cherry from Dye Spin. And I'm going to use Bordeaux, turkey red, and barn red from Pro Chemical and Dye. For the black and gray colors, I'm using black, Stonehenge, and charcoal gray from Dharma Trading Company, and cotton black from Pro Chemical and Dye. The black from Dharma that I'm using is a special order color. That one you can order from Dharma, but you would have to get a large quantity of it, or you can usually find it from a Facebook group called Tie-Dye Supplies Marketplace, which I have a link to down below this video in the description. People out there buy these special order colors in large quantities and then repackage them in smaller quantities to sell. The cardinal red used to be a regular Dharma color, but I think they've made that one a special order color now too. And then the Stonehenge was a special Dharma muck dye color, so that one is no longer available. So for these special colors, you can either just leave them out or substitute another color that you have. I think that's one of the great things about making a geode shirt, because geodes are so vastly different. I mean, you can look at one geode, look at another one, and they're so different. You can use as many colors as you want or as few colors as you want. I still think they turn out looking great. Now I'm going to apply just a little bit of additional dry soda ash over the top of the dye, and then I'm going to add on the ice. For this shirt, I'm going to use some larger ice cubes, which I've made in some silicone ice molds. And once I have the ice on the shirt, I'm going to place it aside and allow the ice to melt. After the first layer of ice melted, I came back and I had quite a bit of undissolved dye left sitting on top. So I went ahead and added a second layer of ice and allowed it to melt as well. So I personally like to add a lot of dye to the top of the shirt at one time. I don't like to just add a little bit of dye and then turn the shirt over and add more dye to the backside, especially not with such a random design like this where I'm adding the dye in very random ways across lines and so forth. I like to add plenty of dye to the top and then just keep adding layers of ice to force that dye on through the shirt. So I came back and added a second layer of ice and allowed it to melt, and then left the shirt for about 48 hours after that second layer of ice melted before I began rinsing it. Okay, as you can see, the dye's gone through to the backside really well. So to begin rinsing the shirt, I took it to my utility sink and I started rinsing it in cold water to rinse out the soda ash. Then I warmed the water up to hot and continued rinsing in hot water to rinse out the excess dye that didn't bond with the fabric. Then I went ahead and untied the shirt, rinsed it just a little bit more, and then instead of rinsing a long time, I went ahead and decided to soak the shirt. I ran some really hot water in my utility sink, added a little bit of Blue Dawn dish soap to the water, placed the shirt inside, and allowed it to soak. When the water cooled off, I changed it out, and I continued that soaking process until my water was remaining almost clear. Then I placed the shirt along with some Dharma's professional textile detergent down inside of my washing machine, and I washed it on a hot water cycle. Okay, so the shirt has been washed, dried, and ironed, and let's see what it looks like. Okay, so what do you guys think? I think this one turned out really cool. I love red. Red is my favorite color, so obviously I love the color. And I love adding in the blacks and grays. Like I said, it just kind of breaks up the red a little bit. I mean, it gives a little bit of some interest because it gives you something a little different, gives some depth to the geode. And I really like the color variation in the reds. I purposely used some reds which were a little bit more orangish, and I used some which lean a little bit more toward the blue-purple side. So I think that makes it a little interesting to look at as well. On the front side of the shirt is a dark black line in the shirt, and right up toward when you're looking at it, toward the left-hand side at the upper portion, it almost looks like a little crown, how the lines go up and then they have a little kind of a dot at the top of each one of them. I think that's a really cool little area of the shirt. And for the most part, I got really good color saturation. Right in the very center of the geode, in that very small area, I do have some white there, and part of the reason for that is because if you tie too many lines in that little portion of geode, it's really hard for the dye to penetrate and get down into that area. So having a little white left there is not unusual. I do have some white up toward the top part of the shirt and a little bit on the back. But honestly, I think those areas just break up the color a little bit, and I think they look really good on the shirt. So clearly leaving the shirt for 3 months to dry out didn't harm it a bit. And overall, I really love this shirt. I love the unusual shapes in the shirt. I love the design, the colors, and I think it turned out really pretty. But what do you guys think? Please drop me some comments down below and let me know what you think. And if you've enjoyed watching the video, I sure would appreciate it if you would like it and if you'd subscribe to my YouTube channel. If you'll hit the bell, you'll receive a notification whenever I upload a new video. Thank you all for watching, and I hope you have a great day.